Hello, I'm Nora, and welcome back to Novels with Nora. Happy April, and oh my god, where did the time go? How are we already in the 4th month of the year? This feels crazy. Yeah, so I'm feeling a little frazzled because how are we already in April? But at the same time, I feel like how are we only in April? So that's where I'm at, but today's video is going to be my quarterly wrap-up because we are already done with a full quarter of the year. Still feels crazy. However, I do want to say that while this is going to be a quarterly wrap-up, I did not do a March wrap-up because I read 6 books in March and only 2 of them are books that you have not already heard me talk about at length. So I figured I would just include them here and then go into the quarterly stats and everything instead of making 2 separate videos. With the first one, I'd really only be telling you about 2 books. So, hope that's okay with you because it's what I'm gonna do. Let's just get started and I will tell you about the 2 books you haven't already heard me talk about in March. So the first book I read in March and the first book that you have not already heard me talk about is Say a Little Prayer by Jenna Voris. And I actually read this as an e-arc, which is super exciting, my first arc of the year. And in this, we follow our main character who, they live in this small town in rural Ohio, and as someone from Ohio, not rural Ohio, but still Ohio. This was a really fascinating read, and it talks a lot about religion. So obviously if that's something you don't want to read about, this is not for you. But we follow our main character, and her sister had had an abortion and then got kicked out of the church because of that. And then also she is bisexual, so the church was not super fond of her. So her and her family don't go to church anymore. They're kind of considered outsiders. But then she gets into a tussle with a girl in school who says something about her sister, and she has to make up for what she did. Originally, she was going to have to, there was some punishment that she could have, but instead the principal's or you could go to church camp for a week and write me a little essay about what you learned. And she's like, well, if that means that I won't have to miss rehearsals for the play that she's in because that's what matters to her, she's like, fine, I'll do it. So she goes to this church camp knowing that she's going to be miserable and just feeling I don't want to be back with these people they shunned me and my whole family because of something that was not my sister's first choice, but it's what had to be done, and now I've been shunned and I don't want to be around these people. But she ends up kind of connecting with people in a way she didn't realize, specifically the pastor's daughter. And when she realizes that the theme of the church camp for that year is the 7 deadly sins, she decides that she is going to try to commit all 7 of the deadly sins. And her little essay is going to be about how she committed them all and nothing bad happened. And then she's going to realize that, maybe that's not how she should be going about things. And a lot of great conversations were had in this book about how people can still have faith just in their own ways, and it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to church, and how religion isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of organized religion that's kind of bad. But she ends up falling for the pastor's daughter, and the pastor's daughter's a lesbian, and so she's having all sorts of life crises because obviously. But I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it a 3.5 star just because I feel the plot was quite predictable, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I enjoyed my reading experience of this one. I would definitely recommend checking it out if any of that sounds interesting to you. But that is the first thing that I read. And then after that, 4 things that you've already heard me talk about. I read The Next Best Fling by Gabriela Gamez and Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. And I read these both for my March Buzzwordathon vlog. So if you want to know more about my thoughts, you can watch that vlog. I'll have it linked in the description and you can go and watch that. But Next Best Fling was a 4.5 out of 5, and that was a cutie little romance that had me giggling and kicking my feet. And then Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke was a 3.5 out of 5 because I really enjoyed one of the stories, and then the other 2 were kind of not for me. This is my reading journal, by the way. Look how cute and colorful. And then after that, I read 2 nonfictions for my surgery recovery vlog, so you can go ahead and check that one out if you want to know much more in-depth thoughts on these. But I read Tits Up by Sarah Thornton, which was a 3.5 out of 5, and then A Boob's Life by Leslie Lear, which was a 2.5 out of 5. So again, you can go check out those vlogs if you want to know more in-depth thoughts, because I'm not going to give them here because I've already talked at length about those. And then finally, the only other thing you haven't heard me talk about is The Ashfire King by Chelsea Abdullah. I got an arc of this, and when I tell you, I was not prepared, and I don't think anyone is prepared, because this is the sequel to The Stardust Thief, which if you've seen my last video that I posted last Wednesday, it was my top 20 favorite books of all time, and Stardust Thief is my 2nd favorite book of all time. So getting an arc of this was super exciting, first of all, and also devastating for me to read because we have no news on when book 3 is coming out. It's a confirmed trilogy. There's not a drop of information on book 3. So I don't know when I'm going to be getting more from these characters, but oh my god, I love this. It was the perfect continuation of the series. I feel like a lot of times trilogies suffer from like the middle book syndrome, where like the middle book just kind of feels like a bridge to get the characters from where they are in the first book to where they need to end in the third book. And this did not have that. This really deepened the plot and the characters and the world building. And it was so wonderful. I took so many notes while reading it, like genuinely so fantastic. Like I cannot say enough good things about it. Obviously I can't tell you a whole lot about the plot because it's a sequel, but read The Stardust Thief, read The Ashfire King when it comes out on April 15th. Oh my god. Okay, obviously 5 out of 5. Yeah. So that is my super quick March wrap up because again, you've already heard me talk at length about a lot of these books. So that brings us to the quarterly wrap up portion of this video, which is the majority of what I want to talk about here. So from January, February, and March, I read 24 books, which is super exciting for me. I read 10 in January, which was crazy, but I feel like I've mentioned this before, I think in my January wrap up. I feel like January is really when I'm like, yes, let's get reading, let's get started, let's make a dent in this reading goal. So I really like pedal to the metal with my reading. And then in February, I read 8 books, which is still super fantastic. And then in March, like I said, I read 6. So if we compare that to last year, in January of 2024, I read 8 books, which, you know, still really good. February, I read 6, which again, still very good. That's what I read this March. And then March, I only read 1 book. And caveat here being that I went back to school. I was still in college. End of February February into March, I was back in school after like winter break. So obviously just was not reading as much. So yeah, read a lot more this first quarter than last year's first quarter. And I'm super happy about that because I was really concerned that doing school online and not having like a very clear separation between like school and personal life, I wouldn't be reading as much because I would just constantly be doing school. So I'm really glad to see that I'm making time for reading and really prioritizing that because it is like my main hobby and something that brings me a lot of joy. So I'm really happy about that. I also want to say, I feel like part of the reason I'm reading so much this year is because of this YouTube channel, because like 4 of the 6 books that I read this month were specifically 4 videos. So, you know, I feel like a lot of what I'm reading is because of I'm also like posting about it and talking about it. So it's like if I'm not reading anything, I have nothing to talk about and then nothing to post about. So I think that's just something to keep in mind, especially with any person who makes any kind of content centering around reading and books. They're reading more than most people because it's a job for a lot of them, and also at the same time, like, it's talking about books is like a hobby extension of reading books for me, and so I want to have as much to talk about as possible, so I want to then read as much as possible, if that makes sense. So it's not like I'm just, oh, let me just sit down and read and I'm reading 10 books a month. It's, oh, I really want to like make good content, let me make sure I'm reading a lot. Just to clarify. Not that I should have to clarify, but I just want to make it clear that I do not typically read this much. It's because I'm making content and I'm absolutely loving it. I feel like tracking my reading and like tracking the statistics of what I read is another like extension of my hobby of reading because I love it so much. Like this brings me so much joy to see. Like I love this so much. So I want to like be able to fill out this calendar as much as possible, which means reading as much as possible. So there's that. Okay, now I have my iPad and we're going to switch gears a little and I'm going to talk about my statistics. Like I said, I love tracking my reading and having different statistics for what I read. And I spent quite a bit of time making cutie little pie charts. So I'm going to step over so I can put them in here about my reading statistics. So really happy to share these. I love a pie chart. So first we have my statistics of owned versus unowned books. So here you go. I read 11 books that I own and 13 books that I didn't own. And I think a lot of this has to do with getting back into reading on my Kindle and fully like learning how to use my Kindle and how to connect it to Libby, because being able to just like request a book and then read it on my Kindle is so fantastic. I would prefer this number to be higher on my owned books because obviously I own a lot of books. I would like to be reading them, but only reading 2 more unowned than owned, I'm happy with that. I think this is a pretty good statistic. This is one of the few times where I've read more unowned than owned books. So I really do think it has to do with my Kindle, and also I read 2 ARCs and obviously I don't own those. So that goes into that. Next, we move into my star ratings. So there's a lot happening in this pie chart, so let me walk you through it. So I had 8 5-star reads. That is crazy. Like that's so many, especially for only being 3 months and already having 8 5 stars. I think this really just goes to show that I know my reading taste and I know what I'm gonna like and what I'm gonna give a 5-star, and that's what I'm picking up. So 8 5 stars is crazy good. Next, I had 1 4.5 star, which was The Next Best Fling. And again, really super fantastic. I love having all these high ratings. This is super exciting. Then we had 7 3.5 star reads. And to me, 3.5 is still like a good rating. That's still a book that I enjoyed. It just wasn't like a favorite, but I would still recommend it to people. So having 7 3.5s, yeah, that makes sense. I still have more 5 stars than anything else. Having a lot of books that are 3.5s, I mean, they're like middle of the road reads. And I feel like a lot of times that's kind of just where things fall. So really happy with that. And then we had 2 3-star reads, which, you know, decent. 2 2.5 star reads, and I think they were both nonfiction. 1 2-star read, and then 2 books that were unrated. The 2 books that were unrated were actually, I believe, graphic novels. Eat the Rich by Sarah Gailey and Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees by Patrick Horvath, which were graphic novels. So the 2.5 star, both of them were nonfiction. It was All About Love by Bell Hooks, and then A Boob's Life by Leslie Lear, which, you know, that's fine. And then the 1 2-star was actually a dystopian novel that I read in January, Independent Study by Joelle Charbonneau, which was like the middle book in a trilogy. Again, middle book syndrome. You know, I'm really happy with that. I didn't have any 1-star reads, so like that's super exciting because I feel like if something's gonna be like a 1, we're just gonna DNF, you know. But I'm really happy with these ratings, especially the 8 5-star reads. Go me. Clearly, I know what I'm gonna like. Okay, so moving on now to the genres of what I've read. I will put the pie chart again up in here. Are you liking the pie charts? Because I'm really happy with how they turned out and like all the different colors and everything. So go me on the pie charts. Graphic designing is my passion. So fantasy and horror were both tied as my top read genres, both at 6 books, which very fascinating. Fantasy is like almost always my top read genre just because it is my favorite. But the fact that horror is starting to creep up, I'm like, oh, okay, fascinating, but I also feel like it has to do a lot with what I'm getting recommended to me or like the content that I'm consuming based on books. A lot of the people that I like to watch on like BookTok, Bookstagram, and BookTube all read a lot of horror, so this makes complete sense to me. And then we had 4 nonfiction, which is also very exciting because my goal is to read at least 1 nonfiction a month, so the fact that we're at 4 in 3 months means that I'm going above and beyond. Go me, I deserve a gold star for that. And then we had 2 contemporary, which, yeah, that's quite typical for me, and then 3 romance, which is not typical for me. However, I did do a romance exclusive reading vlog, so that probably has to do with it. And also, yeah, I'm gonna read romance in February, come on now. So again, really quite like that. And then 3 dystopian, and they were all from the same trilogy, so like one trilogy put all 3 of them up on there. This is very typical for me. There are no surprises here other than horror creeping up, but okay, go me. Next, we have the format of the books that I read, and this ties in with what I said about reading a lot of unowned books because of my Kindle. So if you see here, my 2 top formats were ebook and then physical and audio, both at 7. So again, it makes complete sense. I think all of the ebooks I read, it was the 2 ARCs and then all library books, because buying ebooks to me feels a little silly, especially now that when you buy ebooks through like Amazon and you have them on your Kindle, you don't technically own them anymore. So like, what are we paying for? That is despicable and evil. But yeah, I do not buy ebooks because I feel like, especially with the way Kindle is, where it like saves all of your highlights and like all your notes and everything to like your clippings section, I don't feel the need to buy ebooks. And also, if I liked a book enough to want to buy the ebook, I will just buy the physical copy. But that's a side tangent. Okay. And then 7, physical and audio. That's my favorite way of reading. So having the physical book and following along with the audiobook is my favorite way of reading. So not surprised in the slightest of that. And then another 2 that were tied were physical and then ebook and audio. Again, makes complete sense. The 5 physical were probably just because, actually I know for a fact it was because they didn't have the audiobook for the physical books I was reading, or my holders didn't come in time, or I didn't like the narrator. But most of the time I always tried to get the ebook or the audiobook to go with the physical. And then the 5 ebook and audio, again, makes sense. If I can get both the ebook and the audiobook, I'm going to, because I think it just makes for a very like immersive reading experience, and I really like having both the sound and like the words. So again, not a surprise here. Other than how many ebooks I'm reading, I think this is the first time in like all of my reading that I've really read this many ebooks. So that's exciting. The final statistic I have to share with you are the age ranges of the books that I was reading. So actually, I was quite surprised by this. I had 14 novels that were classified as adult, and 9 as YA and 1 as new adult. And this is honestly quite surprising, but at the same time, like, makes sense. I typically read mostly YA. Like, looking at my shelves, you can see it's mostly YA. I feel like as I get older and as the people that I'm watching tend to get older. I'm getting a lot more adult book recommendations, and I also just feel like that's what I'm starting to gravitate towards more, which is super interesting, but I also feel like this will change again in the future because I am becoming a teen librarian, so I feel like reading more YA books is going to like circle back around for me. So I don't expect this to stay stagnant here. It's a little bit surprising, but at the same time, like, makes sense. Like, I was a little surprised when I saw it, but I was like, no, like, yeah, I can see how that would happen. It's not that shocking. So those are all of my statistics that I have to share with you. Some of these were shocking. Most of them were like run-of-the-mill for me and how I know my reading taste to go, but I am really very proud of myself for how many books I was able to read in this quarter. Like, I'm genuinely shocked that I was able to read this many. Like, this is my page for just this one quarter then, I guess, where if we look back at last year's reading for the same time period, you can see that there's 4 months in one page. So clearly, even just by looking at it like that, I was reading a lot less last year. Again, that has to do with being in school, but like, I'm technically still in school. So I also was reading a lot while I was at work last year and like when I was in school. And so another thing that I was worried about was like, I don't know, I'm gonna have to like genuinely make time for reading, and I don't know that I'm going to do that, especially because like I love watching YouTube. Like, that's my TV. I don't really watch shows, but I watch a lot of YouTube. And so I was like, well, if I have the option of like reading or watching YouTube, am I going to choose reading over watching YouTube? Where like when I was in school, when I'd be at work, I can't watch YouTube while I'm at work, but I can read. So it was like forced reading time almost, where here, like, I had to genuinely carve out the time. And so I'm really glad to see that I still am, and that makes me very happy. Also, my mental health is doing really good. Despite everything that's happening in the world, my mental health is doing pretty good. And I do feel like that has to do with I'm reading and like partaking in the hobbies that I genuinely enjoy. So super happy about that. Next, I want to talk about some of the reading challenges that I am participating in this year. So first and foremost, we have Buzzwordathon. And if you're not familiar, Buzzwordathon is a year-long readathon hosted by Books and Lala, where every month there is a prompt where you have to read a book with like that prompt in the title. So like for February, the prompt was water words. So you just had to read a book with the title having to do something with water. So like I read Our Wives Under the Sea because sea is a water word. However, this year is an anniversary of Buzzwordathon, so there's also cover prompts. So again, for February, the cover prompt was Skyline. So you just read a book that had a skyline on the cover. Proud to say that I have read both the title and cover prompt for all 3 months. So I have read 6 books for this challenge, and I'm super excited about that because my goal is to complete it. The way I'm doing it is I want to read the title prompt in each month, and then I just want to complete all 12 cover prompts by the end of the year. If I can do them within the month, fantastic. If I can't, I just want to get them all done by the end of the year. So super happy to see that I am completing this challenge. Another challenge that I just recently brought upon myself is the alphabet title challenge. This is something that's been around for a very long time, and it's not like super original or super in-depth, but it's where you try to read a book, like there's a title for every letter of the alphabet. I have already completed 10 of the 26 letters. So I have A, abortion, Our Bodies, Their Lives, and the Truth We Used to Win, D, dragon fruit, G, graduation day, H, honey girl, I, independent study, N, natural beauty, O, otherworldly, P, plain bad heroines, S, sound the gong, and T, the testing. So I feel like in only 3 months, that's really good to have all those already in there. And I'm doing it where the does not count. So like, because a lot of books have like the something. And so we're just taking out the and whatever word comes next. So like the testing, technically the starts with the T, but testing is what I'm counting there. If that makes any sense at all. So really happy with that. And then one final challenge that I set for myself every year, but we shall see if I'm actually able to complete it this year. Last year I did the 24 in 2024, and I was only, I think, like 3 or 4 books short of the 24. So this year, again, because I wasn't sure how much I was going to be able to read between like school and like YouTube and everything, I set myself 20 in 2025, and I have only read 4. How I don't think that's too bad, because technically if I read 2 a month, then I think we're getting our goal. So I'm only like 1 or 2 books behind on that goal, and I can always read like more than 1 or 2 a month. So I have read a few of those. I do need to play catch up a little bit. Yeah, that's a wrap. I guess I will read you the books that I have on my list. These are all books that are on my shelves and have been here for a little while. So we have Godly Heathens, He Who Drowned the World, Daughter of the Moon Goddess, Iron Widow, Sound the Gong, which I've read, What the Woods Took, The Poppy War, Her Radiant Curse, Otherworldly, which I've read, Song of Silver, Flame Like Night, The Brightness Between Us, Threads That Bind, Big Swiss, The Honey Witch, which I've read, House of Roots and Ruin, Small Favors, Violet Made of Thorns, Spells for Forgetting, The Testing, which I've read, and The Lost Dreamer. So only read 4 of the 20, but I also read a lot of ebooks these past months. So these next coming months, I'm really hoping to hone in on my owned books, especially because now that I've started the Reader on Haul Challenge / series that I have going here, I'm hoping to really get a lot of these read. If any of the books on that list that I just read are like some of your favorites or things that you really enjoyed, please let me know so I know what to prioritize reading next. Because I suffer from like decision paralysis a lot of times, and that sometimes stops me from reading books on my shelves because I look at it and I'm like, there's a lot of choices. I'll just wait for whichever library hold comes in next, and that's why I'm reading so many ebooks right now. So if you like any of those books, let me know, and that's what I will prioritize getting to next. But those are all of the things that I want to share with you for this quarterly wrap up. I am feeling like invigorated to just keep reading, keep going. I'm really loving a lot of what I'm, like you saw, I had 8 5-stars. Clearly I'm picking up books that I really love. So I'm quite excited to see what the next quarter has in store for me, and I hope that you will stick around to see what it brings, because we have a lot of fun over here. I do a lot of interesting things, at least I like to think so. So I hope you stick around and see what the next quarter brings for me. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Again, if any of these books here sounded interesting, if you have any recommendations for me based on these books, if you like any of the books that are on my 20 and 2025 list and want me to read one, let me know. Otherwise, comment just something fun. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe even, that would be super cool. And I will see you in my next video. Okay, thank you again so much for being here and for watching, and I will see you later. Toodaloo!